years. That's Well, welcome everybody to another episode of Nonviolence Radio. I'm your host, Stephanie Van Hook, and I'm here in the studio with my co-host and Nonviolence News anchor, Michael Negler. Good morning, Michael.
Good morning, Stephanie.
And we are from the Metta Center for Nonviolence, where we study all of the angles and aspects of nonviolence and help people use nonviolence more safely and more effectively. Nonviolence Radio is a project of this work. Today on the show, we have with us other people who are helping activists train and get involved, and we're really excited about their work. They're called Solidarity 2020 and Beyond. We have Catherine Hughes-Freitag and Steve Chase with us. And then later in the show, we will hear from our friend Mubarak Elamin, who is a Sudanese activist supporting the movement in Sudan. He's living in Seattle, Washington. We'll have him back on the show, as he was on a couple years ago with the last movement in Sudan. So Catherine Hughes-Freitag is one of 3 co-founders of Solidarity 2020 and Beyond and is its current director. She's an expert on peace building, social justice movements, and nonviolent strategy and resistance. She trains, convenes, researches hundreds of grassroots activists and nonviolent campaigns and movements who are struggling for peace, self-determination, women's rights, economic and environmental justice, and immigrant rights in Africa, Asia, Middle East, Europe, Latin America, and North America. And actually, over the past 10 years, she's traveled to 75 countries, having been invited by organizers and activists to help provide trainings, education, strategic planning. So welcome to the show, Catherine.
Thank you so much. It's great to be on, Stephanie and Michael.
75 countries in 10 years. That's a big deal. That's a lot of movement, a lot of learning.
Yeah, it certainly is. I think I'm very blessed to have been involved in this work. I always say that I actually learn a lot more than I bring or teach. Mm-hmm. And I have just been, so excited to learn about and work and be motivated by these amazing grassroots activists around the world who, as you said, are struggling for a number of different kinds of issues, some at a local community, some more national or even international.
Mm. And you founded Solidarity, or you co-founded Solidarity 2020 and Beyond, and we have your assistant director with us, Steve Chase. He used to be the manager of academic initiatives at the ICNC, which is the International Center on Nonviolent Conflict. And he did publications, research, curriculum fellowships, online education. And he helped co-lead regional institutes on strategic nonviolence in Nepal and Ukraine. He's a faith-based activist and author of Revelation and Revolution, answering the call to radical faithfulness, as well as Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions, a Quaker Zionist rethinks Palestinian rights. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you so much. It's a great pleasure to be with you and Michael.
Steve, what is a Quaker Zionist? What does that mean?
Well, it's basically, as a teenager, I grew up as thinking I was very critical of Palestinian complaints. I was very supportive because of my concern about anti-Semitism and the horror of the Holocaust, and was very, very supportive of the state of Israel and its policies towards Palestinians. But progressive Jewish friends of mine pushed back and asked me to look more closely and think more critically about the nature of settler colonialism and apartheid. And over a period of decades, I went through a transformation in my outlook. And so in that pamphlet, I was writing largely to Quakers about that journey, encouraging other folks to think critically about the current situation and really live up to our commitment to equality, social justice, and human rights.
It's a beautiful story, but that's exactly the path, isn't it? That we start off with one set of beliefs and ideas, and then patient people work with us, and we help change the way that people think. And
Exactly.
we have the capacity to start in one place and end up in another place in terms of our thinking for social justice work, which I think is important, that we don't always all start off with an understanding of justice that includes everybody, and that we learn to expand that.
Yeah, Steve, I just thought I'd share with you that I went through exactly the same trajectory. Having seen films on Holocaust when I was in high school, being wildly enthusiastic in favor of, quote, Jewish homeland, unquote, and then watching in horror as the thing kind of fell apart and became so violent. And that was a long time before I discovered Gandhi or anything. So I think the good thing about going through a trajectory like this is that we have compassion for people who haven't quite gone through it yet, because, we were there.
I also started out as kind of a, middle-class Protestant person from the U.S. With a lot of white privilege. And during grad school, I was studying the Middle East and peace and conflict resolution out at AU in Georgetown, and went with the human rights delegation during the first Intifada to Palestine. And again, kind of expected to see the two sides in a conflict and a war. And what I saw was just, totally turned over my views, being on the ground and seeing children shot at by Israeli soldiers in Gaza, people tortured in hospitals, seeing, churches attacked. I mean, it was a very traumatic but very eye-opening experience. And like the rest of us, I think, have been involved and engaged in that issue ever since. And I think it's a critical one because of the role the U.S. plays with funding and support for the Israeli state.
And in fact, Catherine's master's thesis was on the nonviolent resistance of the Palestinians in the first Intifada.
Now, it is 2021. We're at the end of 2021, and your organization is Solidarity 2020 and beyond. So, Catherine, maybe you can get us started. Well, we all know a little bit about what happened in 2020, but tell us from your perspective why you wanted to co-found this organization, Solidarity 2020, and then how Beyond got added onto that.
Yes, great question, Stephanie. I was actually a Rotary Peace Fellow at their mid-career program in Thailand at Chulalongkorn University from January to April 2020, right when COVID hit. And during my time there, I was also working with the Global Fund for Women as an expert in movements and social justice issues, as they were also changing their strategic planning and trying to focus more on supporting and being in solidarity with movements versus just organizations. And we started hearing a lot from activists around the world, many of whom I had worked with over 10, 15, 20 years and built a lot of trust with, both at ICNC, but also with Peace Brigades International, where we provided protective accompaniment for human rights defenders in at-risk areas around the world. And what they were calling for was basically saying many of us have been involved in movements and campaigns in regions across the world, and we've been doing okay. We've been moving forward. We've been moving toward democracy. We've been mobilizing. But with COVID, it adds a whole other level of challenge. We ourselves are losing our jobs. We're being locked down by authoritarian governments who are using this as an excuse. It's a health issue, but they're using it as an excuse to shut down our protests and our strikes and our movements. We ourselves are getting sick. Our families are dying. There's a lot of other issues like teen pregnancy, domestic violence rates going up in our communities. And we don't have the capacity to help bring together and convene across the world and across others that we might learn from and provide solidarity and support for, because we're right in the middle of this and we're just barely surviving now. And the 2020 was really important to the co-founders, Marita Reinberg from Finland and Vedrano Bacina from Croatia, the two other Rotary Peace Fellows that co-founded this, because we saw it like Arundhati Roy did, as this portal, as this really critical time in human history where we were going to go through this and either learn some lessons and change some things on the other side, or we were going to just, exacerbate and things were going to get worse. And we saw that as kind of a critical tipping point this 2020. And the beyond is, yes, we wanted to found a network, which has happened, and build something that would last way beyond 2020, this critical time. Basically, with all of these activists calling and contacting us and others and asking for some critical support, we first did a mapping to make sure that nothing else existed that they were asking for, this large, broad network of activists around the world in a number of different issue areas of movements. We found that we probably had the most contacts with over 100 movements or campaigns in at least 70, 75 countries around the world. We ended up now, our Global Grassroots Activist Network, or GGAN, which drives our work, is about 150 leader activists that have already been trained in nonviolent action and are actually been engaged in activities for change and justice in their communities. And they represent a large number of people in addition to that around the world. And so basically, over a period of time, we had biweekly meetings with them. We did a lot of focus groups. We did a lot of requests and action for brainstorming from them. They wanted to do presentations. They wanted to share challenges. They wanted to talk about strategy and action and also how they could support each other with peer-to-peer exchange. And over time, developed Solidarity 2020 and Beyond Network and a really great board that we call our organizing committee with specialists around the world that could support as journalists, psychosocial experts, and a lot of participatory research scholar activists.
Catherine, just to say that what you people are doing is something that I yearned for and called for years ago, and I'm just so utterly thrilled to see it actually coming into existence. I was at a meeting some years ago now, which was leading up to the founding of Nonviolent Peace Force. A lot of people from PBI were there, and our friend Yeshua Moser Pongtuan, you must know Yeshua, he said something quite startling at that meeting, which is kind of what I'm hearing happening right now. He said, you people aren't really starting an organization, which we thought we were. He said, you're starting a movement.
Yeah, no, I was going to say Nonviolence Peace Force has really done amazing work. And as you said, was a close ally of PBI over the years when I was working as the executive director for the U.S. For PBI. And as you said, really became a movement around the world with, working with human rights defenders, working for peaceful alternatives and ways to protect people that were at risk with these teams of activists and regular citizens from around the world. I definitely agree with you. And as you said, what we're trying to do is be driven by the grassroots activists, extremely flexible to respond to their needs and not create an organization, but realize there are amazing groups out there, Beautiful Trouble, ICNC, the Einstein Institute, Nonviolence Peace Force, Metta Center, Waging Nonviolence, all the groups that are working on these issues, and African Youth Movement, Africans Rising, we're very closely connected with them, just trying to help bring groups together and find ways to do peer-to-peer learning, research, and really spread the knowledge both to people that are doing the work on the ground so they can learn from each other, but also for the vast majority of people in the world that are not directly involved but maybe very hopeless right now, and letting them know these amazing things are happening and these amazing, courageous people are out there changing the world for the better. And it's not time to give up hope, but really to have a vision for a better future and that it's possible.
So, Catherine, let's just help people better also understand how they can get involved in your work. Say I'm an activist and there's a struggle for children's rights that I'm a part of. So I would come to you, and what would happen from there? I would tell you about what's happening. I'd say, I can't do this on my own. I'm looking for what? I'm looking for examples of what other people are doing. I'm looking for what would you do when I come to you?
Yeah, so basically we have this group that has been built and kind of connected over time, and very careful with wanting to, the buzzword scale up, but also being very cognizant that trust is the key factor here, and that there are very important confidentiality, security issues for many of these activists. And so we are very careful with who joins our core group and who we engage with. Normally, those are groups that we or others have worked with, so they're recommendations or references or referrals that we can have from the community to ensure that that it is a community-based action or campaign or movement, and that also, there are groups that we can bring into the fold and really can be trusted. We, in general, work with the Global South. We are looking at a lot of ways to exchange with movements and campaigns in the Global North, because we see, Europe and the U.S. have so much in Canada that they can learn from other places. But at the time, there are so many more resources here than there are in other parts of the world. So that's, kind of a first, in a way, stipulation or guideline. And then secondly, we would love to have people contact us, and that's just Solidarity 2020 and Beyond at gmail.com. And or they can go to our website, which is the same, and just get in contact with us. Let us know what they're doing, who they are. We'll get connected. Yeah. We have these OC members across the world, other people in the field across the world that can go out and meet with people, be in touch with people, and then get them involved in our meetings and our webinars and the many activities and working groups that we're building.
Yeah, that sounds really incredible. I want to bring in Steve Chase. Steve, can you tell us a little bit about these webinars that are taking place? I've seen that you've collaborated with Waging Nonviolence on those. And from the digital strategies perspective, what are you doing with those webinars, and what are people learning?
Well, thanks for that question. And I guess I would just like to back up 1 second about why I joined this initiative this summer. Is that I had an experience when I was 15 years old of being recruited into a Solidarity support network of multi-issue activists all over the country committed to strategic nonviolent action, a profound decentralization of power and grassroots democracy, a focus on anti-racism and feminism, and it was called Movement for a New Society. And so I have this experiential base of the power of solidarity networks that are multi-issue and cross a lot of geography. And we focused on things like providing resources, small grants, emergency grants. There was an emphasis on sort of how to do personal maturity and self-care and growth, a focus on researching what different people were doing. There was also a lot of focus on convening and practitioner networks and training and skill building were all part of being part of this national network. And so for me, the kinds of things that Solidarity 2020 and Beyond is doing on a global scale with also people who are embedded in various local movements. And so it has this ripple effect beyond just the people who are directly involved, but it's the people, since they're embedded in movements and campaigns, it has a ripple effect. So I was primed for just knowing the importance of this.
Yeah.
And so that's my personal excitement for about being a part of this initiative. Now, to your question about webinars, it's one of the things that global activists have asked for is chances to learn from each other, but also to amplify what they're doing and what's going on to a wider audience around the world. And the webinars, a particular way to do that people have gotten fairly used to because of the pandemic as a way of convening an education. But it has value in terms of being able to have broad geographic reach. And so one example of using the wisdom of the global South to help global North activists think through some things is around the last election, when there was so much organizing and doing trainings around the country in the U.S. about how to deal with a potential coup. We gathered people from around the world who have dealt with coups, and many of them successfully, and would tell their experiences. And then we really pushed for a U.S. audience, thinking this would really help people think through what some of the challenges are. Other things we've done recently is we did one on building people power and countering violence in Afghanistan, and that had various people because there's very structural things going on. There's critiques of U.S. imperialism and what happened there, but we also wanted to put the focus on what can people do in really difficult situations to have agency. And so we had Afghan activists and others talking about that. The next one we had in late October, we called it Acting in Good Faith, and it looked at the intersection of religion, peace building, and nonviolent action from different people around the world, and thinking through that. We will be partnering with a group to do one on Palestinian rights coming in early December, and then December 21st, based on a short book that I've just written for ICNC Press on the impact of agent provocateurs on movements, the negative impact, and what we can learn about what they do to avoid agent provocateur-like behavior by sincere but sort of misguided and non-strategic activists. So we're going to have people from around the world talking about how they've seen agent provocateurs working in their movements and being disruptive, and what have people come up with to inoculate their movements and campaigns from that kind of negative influence to increase their chances of success. So it's a wide diversity. We shoot to have 1 to 2 a month with different grassroots people, activists from around the world to just have that sort of a global sense of things, but also tied to really rooted campaigns in people's locations.
Well, it sounds like such a wonderful service that you are able to provide, bringing people together, building trust, answering questions that activists around the world all share, different experiences. It sounds like a wonderful network that you have helped put together. And Catherine, I want to turn back to you as we're wrapping up here a bit about the commitment to nonviolence in the organization. Because, activists around the world aren't necessarily all committed to nonviolence, but it seems to be a specific a part of your work in Solidarity 2020 and beyond. And I wonder if you could speak to that, how you look at nonviolence in the work that you're doing.
Certainly. Basically, what we found, nonviolence has obviously been studied by many people and given amazing examples, with Gandhi and in South Africa and Martin Luther King and others. But what we've found over the last maybe 10, 20 years of a lot of academic research and some participatory research in the field is that people using nonviolent strategic action and really understanding it and having the skills and the tools and the analysis to wage it for justice and peace are at least, it's about twice as effective for campaigns and less costly for them. And it actually takes less time to meet their objectives than any kind of armed struggle or violence. And on top of that, the work by Erica Chenoweth, Maria Stephan, Jonathan Pickney, there are many, many in the field now that are working on this, including many from ICNC and the Einstein Center. Gene Sharp is a real leader in this field, has basically shown that on top of that, for those that actually are successful, up to 52% of the last 100 years of all the really tough movements and struggles, of those, about 6% of the armed struggle success actually leads to democracy. About 94% leads to coups, new authoritarian dictators, genocide, civil wars. And in the case of nonviolent action and nonviolent movements, of those 52% or so that were successful over this large period of time, about 55 to 65%, depending on which study you look at, actually lead to more open democratic societies within a few years. And so people that I work with all over in the field, I always say that we're not going to judge their way of struggle or the movements that they're leading or the decisions that they make. We are not there, and we can't make those decisions. But when they look at other case studies, their own experience and their own situations in civil wars and what their parents had dealt with, let's say a lot in Africa or Asia, they themselves really realize how effective and how important nonviolent struggle can be, and how it's much more likely to lead to these more horizontal, open societies in which people of all types, inclusion, diversity are involved. And again, it's not necessarily our kind of democracy, but cultural norms that fit within their societies and have to be driven locally. Mm-hmm. And so we feel important connection to the idea of nonviolence and living a nonviolent life in a principled way, but also the strategic part of nonviolent action, and how important that is to movements all over the world when you're fighting huge powers with lots of violence and military, that you're going to be much more effective if you can build the numbers and mobilize people from all different parts of life, women, children, people with disabilities, older, younger, all different kinds of ethnicities and races. And if you can build a movement together, you're going to be a lot more effective at having a better community and a better future with less violence. As Gandhi said, an eye for the eye makes the whole world blind at some point. And so I believe that's our commitment, and the people that we're working with, that's how they very much see it as well.
All of your expertise just really comes through, and it's beautiful to hear what you're doing and to meet you. So thank you so much for joining us today on Nonviolence Radio. Steve, do you have any last words as well about the role of nonviolence and the work that you're doing?
Well, I come from a peace church background since I was a teenager and became a Quaker. But one thing that I've discovered is my own evolution is that not all pacifists, in fact, the majority of pacifists don't engage in nonviolent resistance. And the majority of people who do engage in nonviolent resistance aren't pacifists. But for many people, even if they're not pacifists, they have a moral preference that if you can get to a goal of justice and freedom and human rights without causing massive suffering, that would be better. But I've also, since I was in the late teens, started reading Gene Sharp because of my involvement with Movement for New Society and other studies I've done. I totally agree with Catherine that the argument about strategic effectiveness, we really want to win. We don't want to just sort of witness to, we want a different world. We want to move towards it through collective action that's strategic and powerful. And for me, that just deepens and deepens the commitment to figuring out a really smart strategy that's using the tools of nonviolent resistance in an incredibly effective way.
Well, we look forward to having you all back on the show, and any way that we can be of support to Solidarity 2020 and beyond, please count us in.
Thank you so much, Stephanie and Michael.
Yeah.
Really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Really appreciate your work over the years.
Thank you for your work.
We'll be in touch. We were just speaking with Catherine Hughes-Freitag and Steve Chase. Catherine Hughes-Freitag is one of 3 co-founders, and Steve Chase is the assistant director of an organization called Solidarity 2020 and Beyond. You can find out more about their work at Solidarity 2020 and Beyond nonviolently.org, and this interview will be transcribed and archived later at Waging Nonviolence. With us next on the show, Mubarak Elamin. He is a Sudanese activist in the U.S., and he was the chair of One America, which is an organization founded by Pramila Jayapal. It's one of the largest immigrant and refugee advocacy organizations in Washington State. Welcome to the show, Mubarak.
Thank you for having me. I'm so honored to speak to in your show and to speak to your audience.
Well, we had you on the show a couple years ago because of the revolution and the movement in Sudan. And now you're back. And let's talk about the movement in Sudan today. And, you know, we discussed having this interview back in October. So a lot has changed every single day in Sudan since then. And maybe it would be wonderful to get us started by catching up our audience of what is the situation now in September, October, November in Sudan, and what are people facing?
Yes, the last time we spoke, we were really kind of celebrating the new Sudan, you know, coming out of 30 years of autocracy and ruled by the most vicious and brutal regime of al-Bashir. That was ruled by al-Bashir for 30 years. And we were celebrating at that time the coming together of two institutions, coming together, the military and the alliance of between the military and the civilians to form transitional government, and also to transition to democracy in 2023. Kind of an elected government in 2023. And then since that time, you know, a lot happened. And you know, fast forward, coming to the current events that are happening in Sudan, just basically that alliance collapsed, and the military staged a coup on October 25th. And basically they dissolved the government, and also they dissolved the civilian government and detained the prime minister and several of his cabinet members. And basically what happened is really kind of a betrayal to the agreement between the military and the civilians, just to kind of guide the country and move it towards a democratically elected government. Mm. Now, what is happening today is really a very tough situation. Specifically, the pro-democracy peaceful protesters are facing bullets and really being killed, and also detained. And several people, dozens of people were killed, and hundreds of people were injured and also detained. So this is a really kind of a grim picture of what is happening today.
Yeah, as last I read, Mubarak, it was like almost 40 people who lost their lives protesting. And I'm going to ask you a question which I wish I were in a position to ask them. And that is, what techniques or what actions do you see going forward beyond protest? Protest, as we all know, is a good beginning. It gets people together. It gives us courage. Then we need a program. Mm-hmm. So what do you see there?
We're actually learning from the streets of Sudan. I mean, really kind of, it's amazing the creativity and how people are committed to, first, they're committed to nonviolence and peaceful protest and peaceful actions. And the second thing they are doing is also organizing. And the third thing they are doing is also being really media savvy. So now some of the techniques, some of the things that they are doing today are primarily around, the protest, barricades, and civil disobedience, strikes, things like that. And those are very much the traditional way. But they're also doing a lot of the working on the media side because, as you know, the first thing that the generals did, they turned off the internet. Okay. Now the Sudanese in the diaspora and their alliances and their friends, they start really working from the outside to make sure that is whatever avenues they found to make sure that the messages go out and people know what's happening in Sudan. And just to make sure that the world is watching. Now, from the inside, people are also thinking about, things like, some of the leaders, maybe they go into hunger strikes and also putting a lot more force into specific times of the day. I mean, just learning from different groups around the world, maybe just going out at a certain time in the night in the neighborhood and just banging drums or whatever, just to make sound that we are all protesting, we're all in this together. The other thing that are being introduced in some way, there are so many groups within the security forces. I would say, specifically, if you're talking about the military or any of that, people are still hopeful that some people will actually come in solidarity with the civilians and come in solidarity with the streets. And traditionally, that happened. Like in Sudan, there were 3 revolutions in the past. In 1964, in 1985, and the recent one in 2019, people saw it actually, some elements from the military institutions came out in support of the people and that made some success in making a transition to civilian government. But those democracies didn't live really long. In 1985, it was only for 4 or 5 years. In 64 as well, ended also in 1969 with another general taking over, things like that. So they're also looking for solidarity from the international community, maybe some groups going into Sudan in solidarity to make sure that civilians, casualties will be reduced and not these large numbers, where a lot of youth are actually dying today because they are so committed, so willing to die to bring about a democratically elected government.
Yeah, that was something that I noticed, Mubarak, in many of the articles about Sudan, interviewing people within the country, was this discussion that people were saying that they were willing to die for this, or even in the kinds of actions people were taking. They're facing down the military. The military has guns. They're going to crowd the military headquarters. To me, that seems like a tinderbox, that you're just waiting for the match to be lit on that. So talk about the escalation of these techniques and what are people saying inside of Sudan that helps us to better understand why people would be willing to die for this.
So this is a really good question, Stefan, because it's Sudan had been ruled by military generals for not less than 40-some years, if not actually more than that, actually. It's almost 60 years. The thing is, people already fed up with the military. They knew they'd been into living in a rut for so long. And they also saw what the military delivers to them. They deliver corruption. They deliver, hunger. They deliver brutality. They deliver lack of freedom. They deliver really all of the bad things. Nothing they do is for the benefit of the people or improves their livelihood. And this young generation that mostly were born within this last military regime, they were mostly either under 30 or so. And there is 47% of the total population of Sudan probably under the age of 30 years old. I mean, between 15 and 30 years, probably about roughly 47%. If you look at that, these people grow up within the military, confinement during that time. And they also saw what the military delivers, as I said. And now they are just not willing to spend the rest of their lives, doing that again. And they're willing to die for their freedom. They're willing to die for justice. They're willing to die for, bringing about some prosperity for their country. And the thing is also being observed is just the level of consciousness, the level of, I don't want to call it education, but really kind of knowledge about what makes sense in this 21st century. And where are we going, or what are we doing, and how do we live our lives, and what is important. And they just demonstrated that day in and day out. They're speaking about, we're not out for bread. We're not out for, lower prices of gas. We're out for our own freedom and to bring about some other higher level values to our life and to our people. And they're so determined to do that. So it's just really like when you read these stories, it's just heartfelt stories that all of these kids, I would call them, really they were heroes and warriors in a way or the other. And they're calling for just the way they are doing it, in a very peaceful way. Sudan is really, you could ignite it with, as you said, if you just drop a match there, that whole country can actually get into conflict, and it's easy to find arms, and it's easy to get into violence. But these young women and men are willing to go still bare hand and opening their chest, and just not willing to get into, not to stage any violence, and also protest peacefully. So that's really the amazing part about this whole thing.
First of all, I wanted to say, Mubarak, it's extremely encouraging to hear this, because we know from history that movements that have used violence to gain their ends end up having a violent regime. That seems to be an inescapable law. So the commitment to peace and nonviolence at this time, at this stage of the movement, is quite critical. But another thing that history shows us is critical is planning, okay, what will we do when we win? And that has to be organized and in place and ready to move, or else the chaos can be extremely dangerous, even after there's a successful overthrow. Now, you did say something about that, Mubarak. I'd like to draw you out a little more on what kind of planning is being thought through here.
Yeah, so that's an interesting side of this whole story, because you're right. In the beginning, when we were looking at the history of this movement and this revolution, which started back in 2018, December of 2018, and for all of the people that studied this revolution, they were kind of amazed that this revolution started really kind of organically, like just something that sparked in one city, and then the anger moved to the capital, and now the whole country at the same time just moved against al-Bashir. And if you look back at this, there weren't any plans for what is next. There was just, the first plan was, we want this tyrant down. We want to bring this tyrant down. And that's the chant that united all of them, which is called in Arabic is called tasqut bas, which is just fall, and we're going to make you fall. And that's the chant, and that's united everyone. So it's easy to unite people around one thing, but now if you move too fast to form a future plan, it also here, the differences come about. Some groups want this, some other groups want this. Then it becomes a lot more into political disarray in that sense. So there is definitely the future plans, and now how far can you take that? Because a lot of people, we're talking during the revolution. Let's make a plan for what is next, and then let's talk about that. Who is going to, what form of government we're going to have? How do we do that? And all of these kind of things. So then people get caught into technicality. So this is not to say that it shouldn't be done, but it should be done in a very intelligent way, very methodical in some sense. How you strike that balance is very important. So this is what we learned from this particular revolution. Mm-hmm. We need a plan, but at the same time, it has to be very, not to open any ways for the divide between people or between different groups.
There's this excellent piece in Al Jazeera by Kholoud Khayer. She's a managing partner of Insight Strategies and a think tank based in Khartoum. And she really describes, but for both of you, that the way that she's saying it is that the movement not only knows what it doesn't want, it knows what it does want, which is a full civilian government. And then she explains 3 reasons why, because the people are, as Mubarak, you're saying, are entirely in solidarity around this. There's no question, there's no collaboration, there's no cooperation with the coup government, right? And people see that the transitional government model was on shaky ground and that they really are ready for something new. And they see the power and the impact that they're having. Mubarak, what do you think that the role of the Sudanese diasporic community can be right now, and how can people support the movement in Sudan and get involved?
I think that in the diaspora has a bigger role to play right now. Specifically, really kind of more of people inside Sudan are doing the work in facing, the military head-on. But the Sudanese in the diaspora are doing a lot of the fundraising to help the fallen people and also their families and all of those kind of things. At the same time, they are also reaching out to their members of, in the house to make sure that they are aware of what is happening in Sudan and also supporting that. And reaching out to some of the media outlets to make sure that the people keep Sudan in the front, in their front pages, and also inform the public about what is happening in Sudan, because that's how we pressure the generals not to commit more crimes against their own people. So those are kind of things that the Sudanese in diaspora are doing. But if you also ask me about what we want the international community to do, I will say really just keep an eye on Sudan, and also for all of the media outlets really kind of to stay on top of what is happening in Sudan. There's a lot of good stories that is going to come out, but not without a lot of sacrifices, and the Sudanese people are willing to do that. But they want to also contribute to something to the international community and to showcase that.
Thank you so much for joining us, Mubarak Elamin, here on Nonviolence Radio. And we are here to cheer you on and to support in any way possible.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Nonviolence Radio. I'm Stephanie Van Hook, and I am here in the studio with Michael Nagler. Michael, please tell us a little bit about what's happening in nonviolence around the world and your Nonviolence Report.
Thank you, Stephanie. Sure don't mind if I do. Listening to Catherine and Steve, I was reminded that what they seem to be doing is filling in a gap which I have always felt was the critical missing element in the development of nonviolence worldwide. Well, maybe it's kind of a double element. On the one hand, we need a supraordinate organization that embraces others, which are mainly just movement organizations. But more importantly, even than that, we need to do some learning, and we need to get the knowledge that, for example, Erica Chenoweth and Maria Stephan promote out into the wider world, be beyond the choir. And what I really hold out for is an awareness that the difference between strategic and principled nonviolence is not just one in tactics, but that principled nonviolence entails an entirely different vibe, if you will, or consciousness or concept of what is a human being and how we are related to one another. So that said, there is kind of a theme that I seem to be observing in nonviolent activities around the world. It might just be me, it might just be the way my antennae were tuned, but it seems to me that an awful lot of strengthening is going into that learning component. For example, at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, there's now a master's degree in sustainable peace building. And they're actually accepting applications right now for the fall semester. So sustainable peace building ultimately, in my view, our view here at Metta, has to be founded on the bedrock of nonviolence. I am not yet sure how much of that comes into the program at UW Milwaukee, but it is so refreshing for me because there was just almost nowhere you could turn to learn about this vast alternative, which is far more positive and effective and elevating of the human spirit than the usual violent techniques. There was no place to learn it. I used to say, in my more, if not cynical, flippant moments, I used to say bank robbers do more touching base and looking with strengths and weaknesses, successes and failures than peace movements were doing. But that is ending. So if one example is that master's degree at UW Milwaukee, and there have been about 200 plus undergraduate degrees, and I'm very happy to see the master's degrees and graduate degrees are coming online. And also, we're always happy to talk about the Global Nonviolent Action Database at Swarthmore College, which we celebrated a while back because it had passed the 1,000 mark. They're now up to 1,400 examples of major nonviolent campaigns that have taken place around the world, and a systematic way of organizing them. And what an incredible learning resource that is. Well, similarly, there's a website that is coming up pretty soon from a research network that deals with this. It's called Creating Safer Space. So they will be happy to publish contributions in their working paper series, which are focused on unarmed civilian peacekeeping, which we always like to promote here at the Nonviolence Radio, and that this will be available as a free download for the Creating Safer Space website. It's still under construction, but it'll probably go up soon. creating-safer-space.com. So this is an international research and impact collaboration, and one of their aims is to understand and support unarmed civilian protection and self-protection amidst violent conflict. So they support the research, they explore how violence against civilians can be deterred or prevented by civilians. I just want to throw in the idea here that it's certainly true that violence against civilians is particularly grievous and offensive form. There could be violence in any direction against anyone that really has to be addressed. So they have coordinating projects based in Colombia, Indonesia, Kenya, Myanmar, so on and so forth. There's a new organization called regeneration.org, and the Institute of Economics and Peace at Oxford has launched a historic peace index, which will be super helpful along with the Swarthmore GNAD.
Thanks so much, Michael Nagler, for that brief report. We want to thank our mother station, KWMR. To you, our listeners, we want to thank Matt Watrous, who's going to transcribe the show, Brian Farrell, who helps put it up at Waging Nonviolence, Annie Hewitt, who does some editing on our transcript. Thank you so much. And to everyone out there, until the next time, please take care of one another.